If you have the ability to punch the cue ball, then you can also make it spin in an abnormal way. Playing a punch shot allows you to hit exactly the same place on the cue ball and get a completely different reaction. Like here when I'm running it through. I'm striking the cue ball above centre here, which would normally make it run on fast. But if I hit it in exactly the same place and punch it, then I get a completely different reaction. So what am I doing differently? Well, I seem to be hitting it at the same height and at roughly the same speed, but the punch shot doesn't run on at all. I appear to be playing two completely different shots. Really, there's two different ways of playing any shot, like a stun shot, for example. Because making the cue ball stop requires a punch shot. Here I'm going to strike the cue ball firm in the centre, and that's going to prevent it from spinning and make the cue ball stop dead. But you don't necessarily have to play a punch shot to stun the cue ball. Instead, you can play it with a lot of backspin as more of a drag shot. This means I play the shot with a lot of backspin very slowly, so the spin wears off by the time it gets to the cue ball, so it doesn't spin backwards, it only stops. A punch shot, however, isn't usually played with extreme amounts of spin. Everything's usually done in this central target area. So instead of a slower shot with a lot of spin, a punch shot is usually a firmer strike with less spin. There are benefits to playing both types of shot. So how exactly do you play a punch shot? To play a punch shot, you need to make the cue ball bounce in one way or another. The first of these ways is power. The harder you hit the ball, the higher it's going to bounce. Usually this is something that's quite difficult to avoid if you're playing a powerful shot, but it's also possible to play a punch shot without using a great amount of power. If you slightly strike down at the cue ball, it will create the same effect with a lot less pace. Which means you can play these incredibly helpful shots and get all the advantages from them, whilst only having to strike the cue ball firm. And to explain why it works, we have to look at what happens when the cue ball strikes an object ball. On a dead straight shot, it'll initially come to a complete halt because the balls are the same mass, just like we see from a Newton's cradle. The cue ball then only moves from this position if it happens to be spinning. Even if the cue ball is spinning, it will still come to a complete halt, which is easier to see in slow motion. The cue ball initially stops, then the topspin helps it run forwards. If it's backspinning, it stops again, and then the spin pulls it back. But what you can't do is use side spin to make the cue ball go that way. It doesn't matter how much side spin you put on the cue ball, it won't spin to the left or the right, because the side spin only makes it rotate. And although this will spin quite fast like a top sometimes, it's not going to move it anywhere. A punch shot works because if the cue ball's in the air, it's not spinning so efficiently on the table. Once again, the cue ball can't grip the cloth if it's not in contact with it, and this is bad if you're looking to use spin to make the cue ball travel long distances. But does allow you to play a number of new shots. So let's look at everything punching the cue ball allows you to do and how you play each shot. The first thing we can do is get the cue ball to slow down quicker, because if I just roll this through, the cue ball's going to go a little bit too far, even if I play it as soft as possible. But if I punch it, I can finish exactly where I want to, without even risking leaving the red short. This is why I said it was a different way to play the same shot, with different advantages. But how does it work? To play this, I just need to strike the cue ball slightly above centre, but crucially strike down on it a little bit, and it'll stop me running through so far. But what do you do if your punch shot isn't having enough of an effect? If you're struggling to get this effect to work, just pull your fingers in a little bit closer to your hand, and then you'll be able to strike down on the ball just a little bit, and it should become a lot easier. By striking down like this, you'll find punch shots a little bit more effective and easier to play. A punch shot might also help you because tables don't always run straight. This is probably the part of my table that rolls away the most, and it's not really that bad, but you can see it going away from the cue a little bit here. This isn't that bad if you're expecting it, but if you're playing on a table that you've never played on before and you play a slow shot, you never know exactly what might happen. So a punch shot can be more reliable at times. You won't be able to play every shot like this, and there'll still be shots you have to risk rolling to the pocket. It just means you'll be able to take some of the risk out of some of the shots you're able to play. So you don't have to play it too hard, but it means it definitely won't roll off. It can also make the cue ball break slightly wider, which can be really helpful at times. So this can also help you adjust the path of the cue ball. The problem here was I was tight against the cushion, which meant I couldn't really play the shot with any spin. I can avoid the pocket by playing it as a punch shot. This is mostly hitting it a bit harder, but it still works. So if I play it again from exactly the same place and punch it slightly, I can avoid the jaws of the pocket altogether. This shot, however, comes up a lot more when you're trying to manoeuvre the cue ball around the angles, and you have to control the path of the white. You can see the cue ball arc as it makes its way down the table here, and the different speeds as well as the amount it's bouncing can affect the shot dramatically and cause it to go very wrong. When you play the cue ball hard enough, you're never going to be able to avoid it bouncing completely. And it's something you'll have to be able to control, otherwise you may find yourself completely out of position. This is one of those things you won't be able to get a feel for until you do enough practice, although you probably won't realise you're actually practising how much the cue ball bounces around the table. But before we look at the next bit, we're just going to find Ariane from Ambala, India, which is there. Here I finished a little bit too straight on the black, even if I play it hard to get up for the next red. So what I can do is punch it in with a very specific amount of spin. Depending on the height I strike the cue ball at here, I could end up over by that red over there, back by this red right here, or in fact anywhere in between. But if I want the cue ball to travel further than these two reds from such a straight angle, then I need to punch the cue ball into the black. And to do this, I've just got to strike down the cue ball by a few degrees. You have to hit it slightly higher because the cue ball will end up with more backspin on it. But if you do it, it will automatically break a little bit wider, and you won't even have to hit it that hard. When you can get this right, you'll be able to force the cue ball to travel over distances, like down for the yellow there, off a very straight angle. It's even a bit far. Another way it can help is with shots like these, because if I just put backspin on the cue ball, then it's likely to end up very close to the blue. It doesn't matter what I do, if I just play a normal backspin shot, this is where I'm going to end up. So instead, what I'm going to do is punch it back for the blue. To do this, I need to strike it a little bit higher on the cue ball and hit it a bit harder, and also strike down on the cue ball a little bit. All these things together help widen the angle. So there we go, it's gone a lot wider. This is a really helpful shot, and it's good to think about it as powering the cue ball back with a slightly lower amount of spin. Again, this is an easy one to learn, and it just makes break building a lot easier. But we've still got more after we find Henry, who's from Durham, North Carolina in the United States, which is roughly there. Punching the shot allows you to put the cue ball in the air and delay the backspin, and that allows you to move around corners. This can be very helpful, but more often than not it causes problems as the cue ball's going away from where you want it to go. Often this happens when you try and split the reds and you're striking down on the cue ball and playing it quite hard, and that makes it go around the pack. This time the punch shot is the problem because the cue ball bouncing is causing us to go around our target. If I want to open the reds here, I have to avoid punching it completely by making sure I've got a lot of backspin on the cue ball and making sure the cue ball doesn't bounce. Making the cue ball bounce with a lot of spin on it, however, is very helpful if you want to play some of the best exhibition shots, although we'll probably save that for another video. So in general, a punch shot gives you more positional options on thicker shots by making the cue ball bounce in the air slightly and reducing the spin. And helpfully for this analogy, these boxing gloves also create a punch shot every time you hit the ball with them. The white only went that far. I think it's just because they're so big and grippy that they automatically stun the cue ball. However, if you know another reason for this, let me know in the comments. Or if you want to see some more videos about putting spin on the cue ball, have a look at these two. And remember, don't just watch, play, and make the commitment to becoming a better player by subscribing to the channel and visit the website. See you later.